Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would review this little video that I found very particularly interesting. And this video was going to be by the boxing channel named Boxing Ego, and I thought that it was a very interesting video. Anyways, for those of you that have not heard the boxing news as of recently, there's been a lot of great fights that have so far been matched up this year, or so far that have happened. Of course, we had the David Benavidez versus Caleb Plant fight. Artur versus Anthony Yard happened not too long ago. We just recently seen Anthony Joshua in his comeback fight. But one of the bigger fights that have been recently announced, and of course Mr. Naoya Inoue versus Steven Fulton as well, and there might be a couple of others that I have not mentioned. But one of the bigger fights of this year, which is, from what I hear, is going to happen for sure on May 20th on ESPN pay-per-view, is going to be the fight, the complete unification fight for all of Devin Haney's belts, between that of Devin the Dream Haney and Vasyl Lomachenko. This is going to be a very particularly interesting fight, really, for a multitude of reasons. But this really is a fight, in my opinion, for whoever is for sure going to break the top 10 pound per pound. Right now, Devin Haney is within my top 10 pound per pound, but he would be just there by a thread. And some people would say, why would you have him just there by a thread? Because I never really thought George Kambosos really, in my view, was a clear A-grade fighter. I think that, Teofimo Lopez was a type of style that was a very bad matchup in terms of George Kambosos facing him because they both fought very similarly. And George Kambosos had certain areas which he was better than Teofimo Lopez in. I don't think that George Kambosos would beat Lomachenko, Gervonta Tank Davis, Devin Haney. I don't think he beat any of those guys. That's just my personal view. And on top of that, I think Teofimo Lopez underestimated him. That's just my opinion. But if you put Devin Haney within your top 10 pound per pound list, I don't mind that. I put him over certain fighters right now, like a Vasyl Lomachenko or a Jamel Charlo, and even a Gervonta Tank Davis because of what he's been able to accomplish. But that's debatable. Someone debate. As for Lomachenko, I have him within my top 15. And the reason for that being is because as of right now, he does not have any belts. Reason number two, the last big 50-50 fight that he was a part of, he ended up losing that fight to Teofimo Lopez, a guy that ended up losing to George Kambosos. So it just is what it is. Right now, Lomachenko, even though I think that he's still a very good boxer and still at a decent point in his career, right now he's not top 10 pound per pound for me, at least on my personal list. But Lomachenko said something in an interview that I thought was very particularly interesting, stating that in his mind, he still believes that he's an undefeated fighter. So we're going to go into that realm. We're going to talk about that. Let's get straight into it.
I know you have a winning mentality, so like, did you ever think like, what the fuck? Like, how did I lose? How is this possible? I'm so much better than Salido. Like, how did this happen?
Look, in my mind, I didn't lose any fight in a professional boxing. In my mind.
Yeah.
So that's why I sleep very well.
So you still feel you're undefeated?
Yes.
So,
No, I didn't talk about you mean undefeated? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. In my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're still undefeated. So
I don't care.
Salido win, Teo win. You're
Look,
still.
if you.
Anyways, just to talk about Vasyl Lomachenko's comments really quickly before we really get into what Boxing Ego is going to say. And I don't really know how long this video is going to be. A lot of us, really, no matter who the person is, a lot of us don't like to take certain criticisms, or a lot of us don't really like to admit when maybe we were wrong about a situation. That's why a lot of times it's very hard for certain people, well, really all of us at times, to really own up to certain situations, because certain people that take losses, or they admit that they were wrong, or when they receive criticism, they take it very personally. And to a degree, that's understandable, because when criticism happens, most of us, of course, believe that you're criticizing the way that I do things, but you're also criticizing my skill set, you're criticizing my value, and more importantly, you're criticizing my intellect. And that's what happens a lot of the times. That's why it's so hard, including really, the best of people, really to admit when they maybe were wrong about a situation or when they needed to improve. Because most people believe at their current moment in time that they're really the best that they're going to be, or that they're at a very, very perfect spot, even when they may not be. And many boxers and many athletes especially, they're very highly delusional, especially fighters. If you ask Deontay Wilder, his level of delusion was out of this world right before he fought Tyson Fury, and he had to be banged back into reality in all three of those fights to finally realize that he was not the fighter that he thought he was. When you talk about Canelo Alvarez after he lost to Floyd Mayweather Jr. He would tell himself that he thought that he was a little bit too green and that Floyd wouldn't even have a chance today. And do I believe that Canelo was a tad bit green or not as experienced as Floyd? Yeah, you could say that. Now, of course, a lot of people will say, well, he had 44 fights, right? But the level of fights Canelo had and the level of fights that Floyd Mayweather Jr. had, they really were not comparable. Now, that is not me stating that Floyd does not deserve credit. Now, what I am going to say is that Canelo Alvarez clearly that he's at his peak. At least he has been within the past few years. We'll see where he goes from here. But Canelo is a better fighter now than what he was back then. I don't think it's really that bad of a thing to say. I still think more than likely I'd favor Floyd to beat Canelo just because of his type of style. But you never know. Anyways, there's a bunch of fighters that have a wild amount of delusion. George Foreman, after he lost to Muhammad Ali, he made a bunch of excuses. He had a high level of delusion. Manny Pacquiao, when he lost to certain opponents, he usually had a high level of delusion, even if he clearly had lost the fight. So Vasyl Lomachenko is not the only fighter to have this level of delusion. And to a degree, sometimes a great deal of belief and a little bit of delusion can be a gift, but sometimes it can be a little bit of a curse. Because when you refuse to accept what ended up happening, and you refuse to look at the facts of the situation, you refuse to become a better person, and you refuse to grow as a person. And Vasyl Lomachenko is 35 years old. He doesn't have time to really take a look back at it, and say, oh, you know what, I really should have changed this, and this, just fight the same way that he did against Teofimo Lopez in this fight. And this is what I'm saying. I don't believe Lomachenko is going to win this fight. And I hope that I'm wrong in terms of saying that Lomachenko does not put up a decent performance. I hope that it at least is a very, very competitive fight. I just don't personally believe that it's going to be. And the reason why I say that is it's not that I don't believe that it doesn't have the potential, but when I take a look at Lomachenko, he's somewhat of a, I don't want to say defensive first fighter, but when he goes against some of those guys with the longer reaches, with that type of style, with those guys that can outpoint him from the outside, but are also able to mix it up with him a little bit, he becomes very uncomfortable. And that's understandable. You don't really want to get hit that much in terms of the sport of boxing. But if he fights Devin Haney the same way that he fought Teofimo Lopez, he can pretty much kiss that belt or those belts goodbye because he's not going to win this fight. Lomachenko has to get in there. He has to really try and outbox Devin Haney. He has to really try to put, he has to really try to put all the type of pressure that he can on Devin Haney. Because if he doesn't, he's not going to win this fight. Period. He has to be ready for war in this fight. He cannot just think about not getting hit the whole entire fight. There's going to be certain times where you're going to have to risk getting hit. You're going to have to make him very uncomfortable. Vasyl Lomachenko has a great power. He's a very great athlete, and to be honest with you, he probably has an all-around better skill set than Devin Haney when he's at his best. But Devin Haney, once again, he has something that Lomachenko doesn't know how to do, which is to release his hands when he needs to. Now, who knows, Devin Haney, he might have, an issue with that later on down the line when he moves up, in weight. But that's not going to be that time right now. And Devin Haney, his confidence is at an all-time level high. He's the undefeated fighter. He's the bigger fighter. He's the younger fighter. He has the confidence. He has the boost right now. He has that glow right now. So what Lomachenko needs to do is that he needs to try to take that glow away from him. He needs to try to take that shine away from him. And he needs to really, 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 really make him uncomfortable. Because if he doesn't, he's not going to win this fight.
That boy Vasyl Lomachenko says in his mind he is still undefeated. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Let me jump right in the mix. You guys heard the clip from a media scrum with Vasyl Lomachenko. As you guys know, he's taking on Devin Haney, May 20th. Great fight, undisputed fight. Loma says it's a dream of his, and I fully support great boxing. And this is a good fight. Devin Haney called Lomachenko out probably when he was 20, 21. Now they're meeting up probably like 4 years later. Devin Haney's about 24 years old. So we'll see what happens. Now, you guys heard the clip, Vasyl Lomachenko. He says in his mind, he is still undefeated. Now, I'm not here to beat around the bush. So my thoughts, I think that's one of the dumbest things that I've heard in boxing in 2023 for several reasons. One, what are we, 6 years old, like little kids, playing cops and robbers where you could just imagine and conjure anything up, and that's supposed to be, this world or land of make-believe, and that's supposed to be your reality. I remember.
Oh, you mean how you try to conjure up about how Tyson Fury allegedly cheated, and how the Sergey Kovalev Canelo Alvarez fight was faked, and how Gervonta Tank Davis is allegedly the main face of boxing, even though his numbers are not up there with Canelo Alvarez. Once again, I don't have a huge problem with Ego. I think that he can be a very good analyzer. But let's not cast stones, especially if you're known for doing shit like that in the past. Once again, Ego is like a crack addict that tells someone else to put down the pipe. It just is what it is. And once again, I think Ego can be a very good analyzer. But he lets a lot of the times his emotions and his racial narrative just get too much in the way. And that's why I like to review a certain amount of his videos. But just to talk about that, just like I, talked about Deontay Wilder and Canelo Alvarez, Vasyl Lomachenko is going to have to change his type of style in order to win this fight, period. Or I'm not going to say really, completely change his type of style, but he's going to have to fight a lot more offensive in this fight. He's going to have to fight pretty much the way that he did against Roy Linares. That's the way that he's going to have to try to fight. He's going to have to try to fight Devin Haney, this guy, tooth and nail in the fight, because if he doesn't, he's not going to win the fight. He's probably going to lose the fight 9 rounds to 3, 8 rounds to 4. Because Devin Haney, combined with his skill and size, he's just too young, he's too big, and he knows when to let his hands go. And he has really the perfect type of style, in my opinion, to really mess up Lomachenko, at least in terms of mess up his rhythm. Lomachenko has a problem with a lot of those 135-pounders, especially the lengthier ones, the guys that know how to mix it up with him. And it is what it is. You expect that to a certain degree. But if Lomachenko is going to be, once again, remembered as an all-time great fighter, he has to win this fight. Or he has to later on defeat someone at least like a Gervonta Tank Davis or a Shakur Stevenson. But if he ends up winning this, if he ends up losing this fight, I don't really know how many more opportunities he's really going to get. Because not a lot of people are really going to want to fight someone like a Lomachenko, who's probably going to be a decent threat really to anybody, possibly for a title position. And on top of that, even though he's somewhat marketable, he's an Eastern European fighter. So, a lot of those fighters, they're not usually the most popular. So if Lomachenko was able to beat one of those guys, it would almost mean a death sentence for their career. So Lomachenko, this is pretty much his last hurrah. This is pretty much his last parade. If Lomachenko is not able to get it done, that pretty much is about it for his career, at least in terms of beating A-grade fighters.
For doing that as a kid, like we would, have certain resources. We didn't have iPhones when I was a kid. We didn't have iPads and all this other type of stuff. We didn't have internet the same. So at the end of the day, we had to use our imagination and create make-believe worlds and,
You still do create make-believe worlds. What do you mean? The make-believe world where Deontay Wilder ended up getting cheated with egg weights in his gloves. The make-believe world where Gervonta Tank Davis is fighting repeated A-grade opponents. The make-believe world where Canelo Alvarez is not the face of boxing. You live in your own make-believe world. All right? Once again, I don't have a problem with people criticizing high levels of delusion, because I think that it's necessary. But Ego and a lot of these other channels, and really just a lot of people in general, this is really not just a Boxing Ego or these other channels' problem. Most people are like this in general. And that's another reason why I like to have this channel, because I've dealt with these certain experiences. Many people, and it's good to somewhat live in your own world to a degree, to have a high level of confidence within yourself. But what's not okay is to have such a high degree of delusion to where you don't really improve as a person. That's not okay. That's not okay, because that's going to affect certain people around you negatively, and more importantly, it's going to affect you negatively. Once again, if Lomachenko thinks that he can fight the same way that he did in the Teofimo Lopez fight and win this fight, he's got another thing coming. He's going to have to really try to bully around Devin Haney. Of course, you use your feet to move in and out of range, but you really have to try and bully him. You're going to have to get in there constantly, push him up against the ropes, push him to the brink, go to his body, get that left cross in there. When it comes down to it, tie him up when you need to. Really, really, really try to get in there and try to frustrate him. Move your head off the center line, keep your hands up, get him up against the ropes, really frustrate him.
And robbers and cowboys and Indians and things like that. And that's where it sounds like Lomachenko's brain is. He really said he's undefeated in his mind. Now, this wouldn't be so bad if, let's say you're a Sean Porter, and up until probably the Terrence Crawford fight, because that fight it ended in a knockout, so there's nothing you could really say there. But a lot of his previous fights, some people thought it could have went either way. Kell Brook was
Well, here's also the problem. There's a bunch of people that really believe that Vasyl Lomachenko's two fights could have won either way. So I understand what you're trying to say, Ego, but I don't think it's the best example because if you really know your shit about boxing, does anyone really believe that Sean Porter actually believed that he beat Errol Spence Jr.? I watched that fight about 3 separate times, and each and every time I've seen it 8 rounds to 4. So if you're going to bring up that example, that's really a horrible example. An example you would need to bring up is maybe someone like a Arasani Lara. You know, that would be a better example because in the Canelo Alvarez, Jarrett Hurd, and Paul Williams fights, the Paul Williams fight, that was a horrid robbery. But in the other 2 fights, you can argue that Lara lost, you can argue that he won. When you talk about Sean Porter, then you're basically saying that Lomachenko does have room to say something then, because in my view, he probably lost to Teofimo Lopez fight 7 rounds to 5 or 8 rounds to 4. Sean Porter also lost to Kell Brook in the Errol Spence Jr. fights 8 rounds to 4. So I don't think that's the best example. I understand where you're trying to go, but it's not the best example.
pretty close. You had the Keith Thurman fight. Some people thought Thurman won. Some people
That was his closest loss, was the Keith Thurman fight.
Porter won. Even in the Errol Spence fight, some people thought the knockdown was the difference maker. Some people thought it could have been a draw, all kinds of stuff like that. So there are guys in boxing who, you know, they have losses and the whole world of boxing knows it's some BS. Like, in my opinion, if we're talking about recently, the David Benavidez versus Caleb Plant card, you had Jose Valenzuela, El Rayo, and he fought Chris Colbert, and now it looks like he has 2 back-to-back losses. One, he actually got a loss because it got stopped by Edwin De Los Santos. Great performance by him. But the second loss is BS. So, you know, you got to look at it on a case-by-case basis. If it's something...
I agree with that. You do have to take a look at the context. But here's the thing with Lomachenko. The fight against Orlando Salido, you could debatably argue that he won. But listen, the point that I'm going to say is this. Whether you thought that Lomachenko won those fights or not, if you're getting it to the point to where it looks like it could have went 7 rounds to 5 either way, you can't really blame the judges for however they score the fight. And that's where Lomachenko is going to need to improve. I don't give a shit what he says about, oh, I still believe that I'm an undefeated fighter and all this other. Listen, dude, that's great. And it's great that you still, allegedly have a high degree of confidence within yourself. But at the end of the day, you are going to need to change your style for this fight. You are going to need to really go balls to the wall in this fight, period.
Thing like El Rayo, where he never was hurt. There are cases where the fighter gets jobbed by the judges or something like that. That wasn't the case when talking about Vasyl Lomachenko. Yeah, that's a good name for him, Vasyl, because he acting real silly right now. You can't
What a bar.
just have fights where the consensus is that you lost. Like, even Lomachenko apologists and the diehard fans and old media, I never even really seen or heard them say that they thought Lomachenko won the fights that he lost. If anything,
I've seen it, but once again, when you just take a look at it from a logical perspective, it's almost like taking a look at the Canelo Alvarez versus Gennady Golovkin rematch, Gennady Golovkin versus Canelo Alvarez rematch, or maybe not even that. You might be able to take a look at it. I think the better comparison would be that of Sean Porter versus Errol Spence Jr. Except Lomachenko versus Teo, it probably was a bit closer than that from what I remember, at least in my view. Yeah, some small amount of people might be able to debate that, Lomachenko won the fight, but in a more realistic scope, in my view, he just didn't throw enough to win the fight. It just is what it is. Now, in the second half of the fight, he was starting to win, and I thought that he won 4 of those rounds at least. But the first 6 rounds, man, you barely threw anything.
it's actually the other way around, which makes the conversation even more foolish. So, what do I mean? His last fight, for example, he fought Jermaine Ortiz, who banked a lot of early rounds, and to me, Lomachenko did not look great or sensational. Basically,
I don't think they look great or sensational either. But listen, once again, I give Lomachenko a slight break at the 135-pound weight division because it's obvious he's not a natural 135-pounder. Now, of course, the LDBC and new media, they're not going to go along with that because, of course, they want to make it sound like Lomachenko is just losing purely because he's an overrated fighter. No, it's very clear that if you don't have an agenda afoot, he's not a natural 135 pounder. And Devin Haney is probably going to be anywhere from 1.5 to 2 weight classes bigger than Lomachenko on fight night. That's just the way it is. But if Lomachenko truly is an all-time great fighter, as certain people try to say that he is, or if they once upon a time stated that he would whoop Devin Haney, well, then we should be able to see it in this fight. So let's see what happens.
Everything that old media said, I didn't really see that specifically in that fight. The size of Ortiz, the jab, the athleticism, the power, it just didn't look like the typical Lomachenko. See, that's the thing. Old media.
And I knew more than likely it wasn't going to look like the typical Lomachenko because that type of style, it is going to give him problems. It just is what it is. Lomachenko is a guy, once again, that's about a natural 130 pounder. And he's a guy that can be damaged a little bit more than Gervonta Tank Davis, save for that weight class. He's not as, stocky. So the punches are going to affect him a little bit more. So obviously he needs to be on the defensive a little bit more at times than what Gervonta Tank Davis does. But you still have to be willing to throw. Lomachenko is great at not getting hit. He gets hit a very little amount of times. But you can't win a fight just by getting hit severely less. You also got to throw. You got to impose your game plan. And if you think that backing up against Devin Haney the whole entire time in that fight and just thinking that, you're going to be able to back up and not throw that much and throw 3 punches per round within the first 6 rounds, as long as you don't mainly get hit and you think that you're just going to win the fight after that, you're surely mistaken, dude. And you can't wait for Devin Haney to tire out because Devin Haney don't tire out. So you really have to, like I said, you really have to push the pace in this fight. And if you end up pushing it completely in the second half of the fight, that's up to you. But in my opinion, that's not the best strategy because you have to really try to fight tooth and nail to really grab every round that you can. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, they're looking bad right now because they put Lomachenko on this crazy pedestal, and then now he's not able to fill those shoes. They made the shoes too big. And that's the reality of it. So now you're seeing all these excuses. Oh, Devin's a heavyweight. Oh, Devin's too young. Oh, see, this is what old media.
Well, once again, in my view, it's not an excuse to say that Devin Haney, that he's clearly going to be bigger and that he has the age on his side. Those aren't really excuses. But once again, in my opinion, if you're one of these guys, and I did see a certain amount of them, I do agree with Mr. Ego here. If you were one of those guys that claimed that Lomachenko, that he would beat Devin Haney, that he would beat that guy like Paulie Nagy, then you have to stick by that.
It does. So when Devin Haney is the fighter who's
just like Dante's Boxing Nation, he says all this shit about Canelo Alvarez, but then as soon as that Jamal Charlo fight, as it was allegedly about to happen, what did Ego and Dante's Boxing Nation do? They all of a sudden said, oh, we don't even want to see the fight because Jamal Charlo's not the same fighter anymore. So Ego, he talks all this shit, but he does the exact same thing because he's another one of these race fans. He's just nothing but another big fanboy, and you cannot be a fanboy if you're going to be a logical and an objective analyzer. You can't do that. You have to separate yourself from fans. You have to do that. Otherwise, you're not trustworthy as an analyzer, period. I don't care who you are.
Has youth on his side, all of a sudden, the youth is a strength. It's an advantage. Like, oh, he's young. But then the same fans and the same old media, when Floyd Money Man, easy work, I ain't gonna worry about it. When he was the older veteran fighter, and he was 36, gonna be 37, so he was pushing 40, and he was fighting the young up-and-coming fighter who had beaten Shane Mosley, who had stopped Jose Cito Lopez, who brutally knocked out Carlos Baldomir, mutual opponent of Floyd, who had just beaten Austin Trout. When Canelo stepped in the ring, they had about almost as many fights as each other. Like, let's say Floyd had 45 fights, Canelo had 44 fights. Obviously, the level of competition was different, but to each his own. Canelo had his own path to get where he was at, and Floyd had his path. He's an Olympian who got robbed in the Olympics. So, again, when Floyd fought a 23-year-old, bigger, stronger Canelo Alvarez.
Right, but let me commentate on that really quickly. Listen, what I'll say is this, and the excuse that certain fans have made about, oh, Canelo Alvarez was way too green, he would knock out Floyd today, or he's better than Floyd because he beat Canelo at way too green of his career. I do agree that is a little bit of an excuse, but what I also will say is this. Just because someone has 44 fights on their record doesn't mean that it's the same as another person's 44 fights. Lomachenko, if we really want to talk about it, he probably has more experience than quote unquote Gervonta Tank Davis against more upper echelon opponents. Gervonta Tank Davis has 30, almost 30 fights in his record now. Lomachenko don't even have 20, but Lomachenko, because of the people he's been in the ring with, he probably has more higher grade experience than that of a Gervonta Tank Davis. And it was the same thing with Floyd Mayweather Jr. He had already been there, had already done that. It was basically the maestro, basically the main master, in that of Floyd Mayweather Jr. versus that of the up-and-coming guy, Canelo Alvarez, possibly the new maestro of the future or the up-and-coming new, possible face of boxing. They had plans for Canelo Alvarez, and, right now that is still somewhat in fruition. But when it came down to it, Canelo Alvarez, his experience against elite level fighters, and on top of that, the difference in skills and the difference in styles, it proved to be an advantage for Floyd Mayweather Jr. So it was not just the experience that was just an advantage for Floyd Mayweather Jr., but it also was the fact that he had quicker and better feet than Canelo Alvarez. It was also the fact that he was more intelligent than Canelo, and Canelo is an extraordinarily intelligent fighter. Was the experience a part of it? Yes, it was. But a big part of it also was the difference in skill sets and the slight tunings that Floyd Mayweather Jr. had over Canelo Alvarez. So it was a little bit of everything. But let me also state this. Boxing Ego and a lot of these guys, they try to claim that Canelo Alvarez has not gotten better ever since that loss. I don't agree with that. Yet they try to debate certain fighters that they wanted to debate that got better, like that of a Jamel Charlo, who lost to Tony Harrison not too long ago. Every fighter usually gets better, especially when they're A-grade level champions. Every fighter gets better as the years go along. Until they probably hit around that age of 35 to 36, depending on certain fighters.
Rez, old media says it was a disadvantage. They say, oh, he was too green. Oh, no, he wasn't ready. They said Canelo wasn't ready. But now, when you have a black fighter, an American fighter, a guy like Devin Haney, now the youth is an advantage. So it's funny how these things work and these double standards work. For Canelo to be 23, fighting an older Floyd who was well out of his probably true weight class, Canelo was too green and he was too inexperienced and he wasn't ready. And those same old media and race fans, they waited until many years later when Floyd was retired from the sport of boxing and Canelo was fighting as high as 175. And then now they let their nuts drop and said, oh, Mayweather should rematch Canelo now. No, it doesn't work like that.
I agree with you. I agree with you full-heartedly. But let's not bullshit. Let's not beat around the bush. You're just as bad as any other race fan or mega fanboy out there. Because when Canelo Alvarez wanted to fight at cruiserweight, a weight class which he never should have even tried to attempt at the first place because he started at 154 pounds, you were saying, well, why is he fighting Loma Makabu? He should fight Alexander Usyk. So Ego tries to act overall like he's so above a lot of these guys. He's not. All he is another fanboy, and that's why his analyzations a lot of the times, even though I think some of his analyzations are very good, in certain critical moments, he can't really be trusted 100% either. And that's why I like to review a lot of these guys' videos, because this is just most people in general. And the reason why I do these videos especially is because you have to be as logical and objective as possible. Whenever you're really deciding something, you really should be thinking with a logical and sound mind and not based off of emotions. And if you're especially going to be a judge, or if you're going to be an analyzer, or an objective quote-unquote analyzer who quote-unquote speaks the truth, you have to be as objective as possible. And you have to try to put every agenda that you might possibly have aside. And if you can't do that, you can't be a judge. You can't be trusted.
So I find it funny in this Haney Lomachenko situation that people aren't framing it the same way. They're saying Loma's too old. They're saying Loma. I mean, age is wisdom, is experience. The stuff I know now, I didn't know when I was 21 years old.
Well, it is, wisdom, but when you're an athlete, it's not the same thing. Because when you start to hit that age of 35 years old, you can start to go down. Not every athlete, of course, ages the same. When you talk about Bernard Hopkins, he was still an A-grade level fighter during his 40s. And certain people may highly disagree with that, but he was still one of the top 5 pound-for-pound fighters in his 40s. That really was actually looked at the best point in his career, at least debatably. When you take a look at Gennady Triple G Golovkin, he still was at the prime of his career at age 36. Now, depending on quote-unquote new media, with Boxing Ego and those guys, depending on if they want to tear down Gennady Golovkin, they'll say that Gennady Golovkin, that he was still 36 years old and that, that he should have been good enough to beat Canelo and that his career was a failure. But then when they try to tear down Canelo Alvarez, oh, well, Gennady really should have won those fights and he was 36 years old anyway. So once again, these channels, all they are is mega race baiting fanboys as well, just like those guys they talk about when it comes to Vasyl Lomachenko, who are fans of him. They're no different. It just is what it is. But anyways, I understand Ego's point. Once again, not every fighter age is the same, though. Floyd Mayweather Jr., when he was 36 years old, he was still pretty much at the best point in his career. When you talk about Roy Jones Jr., he was not. When you talk about other fighters, they were not. Some other fighters may have been. It really just depends on the fighter. Manny Pacquiao was able to beat Keith Thurman, an undefeated Keith Thurman at like 40 years old. Not every fighter can do that.
I'd be a billionaire if I knew everything I knew now. But that's what happens as you mature with age and, you learn different stuff. I mean, imagine like even me being a YouTuber. Imagine if I started YouTubing the year YouTube came out and I decided to try to make this a career. I didn't do that until, some years later. So you live and you learn. So being older also can be an advantage. You carry experience, but
it certainly can carry an advantage, but let's also be real about Lomachenko here. And this is not me stating that he's quote-unquote washed up. Lomachenko still should somewhat be able to win this fight because he's still looked at as one of the top 10 pound-for-pound fighters on certain lists. So Lomachenko has to win this fight if he wants to be remembered as an all-time great fighter, period. That's just the way that I view it. But it is obvious that Lomachenko, he's 35 years old. He's not going to age the same way as many other fighters. He's going to take more damage than some other fighters. He has a 65-inch arm reach against guys that sometimes outreach him anywhere from 3 to 5 to 7 inches. And he's in a weight class to where he is not as heavy as those guys. So he's not going to age the same. Not every fighter ages the same. A big part of the reason why Floyd aged so well is because of the lack of damage that he took. And a big part of the reason why that was not only because of how skilled and how greatly defensive he was, but also because he had a 72-inch arm reach. Anyway.
The bottom line is what you're seeing is old media is not confident. So they're coming.
And some people might say, well, what does that have to do with anything? Because he still was outweighed by those fighters. Right, but as long as you have some sort of decent power to keep your fighters off of you, and if you have a high degree of intellect, as long as you can somewhat compete with their reach somewhat, then you should more than likely end up being okay in the fight. Especially against fighters that more than likely are going to be a bit slower than you. Now, that is not me making excuses. Floyd still did a great thing, and not many fighters can do what he can do. But that 72-inch reach arm advantage, even when he went up in weight, it still was an advantage that a lot of people, that they don't really pay attention to. Lomachenko doesn't have that luxury. And that's not me making excuses, but that's what I'm saying. Lomachenko cannot fight as defensively as sometimes what Floyd Mayweather Jr. could afford to. Like certain people, they take a look at Lomachenko and they're like, oh, well, I don't ever see him fight, as defensive sometimes as what Mayweather does. He can't fight that way. Lomachenko, he realizes that. That's why, at times he pretty much has to be on the front foot, especially against these, much bigger fighters because he can't afford really to fight that way. So he's really going to have to throw, once again, balls to the wall.
With the pre-built excuses for Vasyl Lomachenko.
Because even Mayweather, when he was in the ring with certain fighters, the only fighters that I can really remember that outreached him, and he still was able to beat them, of course, was Diego Corrales and Oscar De La Hoya. But even when he fought certain fighters like Miguel Cotto or, Canelo Alvarez, he still had the longer reach than them. Sometimes not by much, but he still had the longer reach than them, and that can be an important factor.
And it's funny because when Wilder says Tyson Fury's the cheat,
kind of like John Jones in terms of that at UFC. And once again, that is not excuses for either of those fighters at all. That is not me trying to downplay. That's just me stating that that's an advantage that some of those fighters have. Terrence Bud Crawford has a very similar, advantage to where he can move up really, possibly even a middleweight. And if he fights, a B or C grade middleweight, he's going to be able to probably still dominate him because Terrence Bud Crawford is like a 74-inch arm reach. Now, if he had like a 67, 69-inch arm reach, he wouldn't really be able to do that. But, when you have longer arms, that gives you more ability to fight, kind of the fight that you really want to.
You know, people are all up in arms and like, how could he say that? That's crazy. He's delusional. They say these types of things. But then when Lomachenko is in the media,
Hold on, let me rewind that.
because when Wilder, let's say when Wilder says Tyson Fury's a cheater, you know, people are all up in arms and like, how could he say that? That's crazy. He's delusional.
I agree with that, Mr. Eagle, but once again, you're criticizing Lomachenko, but you didn't criticize Deontay Wilder. And Wilder, for all intents and purposes, he really probably did deserve to be criticized more because he's alleging that Tyson Fury used egg weights in the glove and alleged all this stupid bullshit. And to this day, he has never had any evidence.
They say these types of things. But then when Lomachenko is in the media scrum and he's saying he's undefeated in his mind and he doesn't have any losses as far as he's concerned, nobody seems to think that is a weird statement to make. Now,
Listen, I somewhat agree with you, Mr. Eagle, but let's also be real here. What Wilder said was 10 times more intrusive to that of the normal ear, because when you're alleging that a person cheated, especially with egg weights, and you got poison and all that other shit, that's going to attract more attention. Now, do I believe also that Wilder probably did gain a little bit more extra attention because, he's a black fighter, as Eagle would state? Sure, you can make that case. But Wilder also made some of the dumbest excuses that I personally ever heard. And once again, Eagles, criticizing other people, saying like, oh, well, you won't criticize Lomachenko, but you criticize Wilder. Eagle, you were one of the main defenders of Wilder. I never heard you mainly criticize Wilder. You were on his side the whole entire time because you're another one of these guys, another one of these pro-black channels that fell into the narrative of Deontay Wilder being the new, Malcolm X-like character. So it is what it is. At least you thought that he was going to be a savior of black people, and that's not how it's going to work.
Further examine, since we unpack coming to you live. Let's further examine the actual losses that Lomachenko does have, like Salido. He lost the fight. He started.
Well, that was a fight that really could have went either way in my view, but at the end of the day, Lomachenko made it way too close.
Slow. He did good in the 12th round, almost stopped Salido, but coulda, shoulda, woulda. It's not about what you almost did, it's about what you did. Salido,
I agree with that.
Having experience. See, Salido was knocked out in his first pro fight in Mexico, so he didn't have any breaks. He came up in the Mexico circuit, fighting probably older and bigger people, and he just had to learn on the job. So they come from two different worlds. And when Lomachenko turned pro, he wasn't ready for roughhouse like tactics, and that's part of the pro game. It's not the amateur where you're just touching the score and
Well, I agree with that, but once again, I also give Lomachenko a little bit of a break for that fight because that was only his second professional fight in his career. So I gave him a little bit of a break for that fight. I really don't go super hard on Lomachenko for that fight, but the fight that I do go a little bit harder on Lomachenko for was Teofimo Lopez, because you were looked at as the best point in your career, and you pretty much gave that fight away. Period.
look at to bank and score up tallied points. There's different tactics. Some people, they'll hit you low to make you uncomfortable. They'll rabbit punch you. They'll use their forearm. I mean, you have to put your faith into the ref, and if the ref ain't giving you the calls that you want, then you got to keep fighting, and that's just the nature.
Well, you know what? I actually agree with you, Mr. Eagle, but where was this shit in the Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder fight? Where was this shit then? Because wasn't this the same dude? Wasn't this one of the dudes I was saying that, oh, Tyson Fury, he cheated in the fight? Take a look over all the shots behind the head and all this other bullshit. I agree with you. These guys will say it with Lomachenko, but then when it came to their pro-black god in Deontay Wilder, because they worship him like a god and like a pro-black savior, they took a look at him and they were like, oh, well, Deontay Wilder, take a look at all the stuff Tyson Fury was doing. It was dirty. No, sometimes you do need to realize that sometimes if the ref ain't going to help you out, guess what? You got to take it the extra measures. And he is correct. Lomachenko should have took it the extra measures. I agree. As well as Deontay Wilder should have. He should have known how to fight a little bit dirty on the inside, known as dirty boxing. But he doesn't really know how to fight very well on the inside. As most bully fighters actually don't know how to fight super well on the inside once a fighter knows how to push them back.
Of it. So Lomachenko absolutely in his second pro fight wasn't ready for that transition. But that's his
I agree with that.
own confidence and that's his own arrogance. He thought that, oh, I'm Lomachenko, I got almost 400 Emmys, that I could just come in and no matter what style, I'm gonna do something that you ain't seen before, and I'm gonna beat a Salido in my second fight. And it didn't work out for him. But that was a
I agree with that, but what you're basically admitting there is that Lomachenko was not ready for that fight. So once again, for the people that are saying that, oh no, Lomachenko just lost to Salido because Salido was more skilled or blah blah blah. No, that's not really what happened. What Lomachenko lost that fight is because he took a title fight way too soon.
L. Now also Teofimo. Teofimo, he came out strong.
And when I say more skilled, you can say that Salido, that at the time that he was better than Lomachenko just because he was able to give him the amount of problems and trouble. But in terms of peak v peak, Lomachenko and Salido, no, Salido's not more talented than Lomachenko.
Lomachenko was afraid of Teofimo's size, athleticism, and power, and Teofimo really banked all of the early rounds. Lomachenko was very tentative and apprehensive for
I agree.
the first 6-7 rounds. So it's a 12-round fight. There were no knockdowns. Lomachenko didn't get a knockout. So what is he talking about? He's undefeated. Now, there's a difference between telling people in your mind you're undefeated and maybe even saying something like, everybody I lost to, I think I'm better than or I could beat them. Because then that could be a little bit more subjective. But it's in poor taste to do what Lomachenko is doing. And it sounds really borderline narcissistic, to be honest. Because
Oh, that sounds borderline narcissistic. But Deontay Wilder alleging all these cheating allegations, firing Mark Breland, alleging that he poisoned him, alleging Tyson Fury used egg weights. Where was the allegations of narcissism? Once again, I really don't have a huge problem with Ego alleging this, but Ego always tries to spill you this bullshit about, we tell the truth here, we unpack. Dude, all you are is a pro-black mega race fan, mega fanboy, just like any of these other dudes that you talk about. Like, this is the reason why I review these videos once again, because that's all these guys are, man. Once again, these guys cannot be relied upon. So they will bring up good points, but at the end of the day, they cannot be relied upon. Like if you were to put them in a boxing judge situation, you couldn't put them in there because you can never trust them for a fight like this, for a Devin Haney Lomachenko fight like this. You cannot trust them to be logical and objective. You can never put them in that position.
It's no shame in losing. Like, that's why I respect Caleb Plant. I know he don't have nothing to do with this video, but real is real. Caleb Plant went out there, tested himself with Canelo, lost by stoppage, nearly got stopped by Benavidez, but gave it a go, pushed both fighters, showcased his heart.
No, say what happened. Lost to David Benavidez, but didn't get stopped. The reason why he wants to say nearly got stopped by David Benavidez is because he wants to try to allege that David Benavidez had the better performance over that of Caleb Plant. Because Canelo Alvarez is still enemy number one for these guys.
His skill, and you can't break a poor boy's chin in the Benavidez fight. All this type of stuff. That's why even in the loss, it got people really respecting Caleb Plant. Just because that's what boxing's about. You're not going to win every single fight. It's very hard to do, That's reserved for the Andre Wards and the Floyd Mayweather and Calzaghe and a select handful of people who can go their entire career without taking a loss. But for the rest of us, for the rest of the fighters, they're not that fortunate. So it's not even a shame to lose, but for Lomachenko to insist that he's undefeated in his mind, it just sounds like poppycock. And ironically enough, old media, they let him say it, and they have no qualms or quarrels or any issues with it. They think this is regular for Lomachenko to be saying he's undefeated in his mind. Devin Haney seeing it on...
Right, and Mr. Ego, I don't really have a problem with that. But if you're going to set the standard higher, like you allegedly do, where was this talk with Deontay Wilder? Where was this talk with Deontay Wilder? That's what I need to know.
Twitter and just laughed at it because, again, it is laughable. So y'all got to keep the same energy. When Devin fights, he's fighting an undefeated fighter. Well, at least in Lomachenko's mind, he's undefeated. So if Devin wins, I do not want to hear any excuses about Lomachenko was too old, or, he has seen better days. He had too many amateur fights. He's a true featherweight. Don't tell me none of that. So old media, they continue to shoot themselves in the foot and make themselves look dumb. Because now with Lomachenko saying he's undefeated, I don't believe it. But if he really believes that, then there's no excuse if he loses yet again to another young fighter. So he better win.
Well, I certainly agree with that from Lomachenko's perspective. If you agree with yourself that you're potentially undefeated and that you're still at the best point in your career, then there's no excuses to why you lost to Devin Haney.
And beat Devin Haney, because I'm not accepting any excuses from the Lomachenko fans. He says he's undefeated, so there's no reason for his confidence to dip. Even though,
well, what Lomachenko says and what is reality is going to be different, just like what Deontay Wilder said from Tyson Fury is going to be different, or excuse me, what Deontay Wilder says is going to be different. Like if Deontay went into, his next fight and said, I still believe that I'm an undefeated fighter and I'm better than ever, we would still have to see the results about that, because that may not be the case. And there's many fighters that say that, oh, I'm at the best point in my career. Listen, bottom line is this. Is Lomachenko washed up in my opinion? No, he's not washed up. Is he maybe slightly aged? Sure, you might be able to debate that he's slightly aged, but he's still at a very good point in his career. And if Lomachenko is going to be remembered as an all-time great fighter, I don't give a shit that he's 35 years old. There was a lot of people that were predicting that Lomachenko would win this fight. I need to see Lomachenko win this fight. If he is ever truly going to be on that all-time great level, he needs to at least win this fight, period.
well, I think the Gary Russell Jr. fight was extremely close, where he should have probably
Well, no, it wasn't really that close, but I don't really expect anything less from Mr. Ego.
gave him a rematch. The Jermaine Ortiz fight. So realistically, he should probably have at least one more loss on his record. But in Lomachenko,
No, he shouldn't have one more loss in his record, because he beat Jermaine Ortiz and he beat Gary Russell Jr. Let's stop the bullshit. All right, but, it is what it is. But at the end of the day, I understand what Ego is saying, at least to the degree of where Lomachenko is delusional, at least to the point, if he truly believes that, to the point to where he is, putting himself more at a detriment than what he is an advantage. Because Lomachenko, he's going to have to be better in those fights than what he was, or excuse me, he's going to have to be better in this fight than what he was in those fights.
Goes mind, he's undefeated. Now, lastly, I think this is pretty ironic, given the fact that ESPN on multiple occasions put up fake graphics saying that Lomachenko was undefeated and scrubbed away his losses. So to hear Lomachenko say that he feels he's undefeated, well, ESPN did too, because there's multiple telecasts where they put his record as like 17-0 or 18-0 and completely acted as if he doesn't have any losses. But the reality is, the history books, when they're written, box rec, they say what they say, and Lomachenko can say, like 50 years from now, no one's going to be like, oh, Lomachenko thought he was undefeated. They're going to look to the history books and be like, Lomachenko lost this fight and he lost this fight, he won these fights, period. So I thought it was a weird statement.
I agree with that, and more importantly, they're not even fights to where you could take a look at them and say that they were robberies. There's a difference between, if you want to maybe say a fight was quote-unquote a robbery, neither of those fights are robberies. So Lomachenko can say whatever he wants. At the end of the day, he did debatably lose both of those fights, is what it is. He can say anything otherwise, but he's going to have to really turn it up in this fight.
Drop your thoughts in the comment section. I'm the best in the business. Subscribe. We unpack.
But anyways, that's really about it for today. I just thought that I would talk about that because I thought that was very particularly interesting. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.